The resignation letter was already folded inside the breast pocket of his shirt when Calvin Reed lit the burner under the kettle, and the kettle was the loudest thing in the house. He had written it at 3 a.m. on a yellow legal pad and copied it neat onto school stationery at 5. 2 sentences. Dear Mrs. Doyle, I am resigning my position effective immediately, and I am sorry for the timing. He had signed it in the careful, slanted hand of a man paying attention to the shape of each letter because the shape of the rest of the day was unbearable. On the kitchen calendar, taped beside the refrigerator the way Margaret had taped it, the square for the 17th of October had a hand-drawn cake in green marker. Inside the cake, in her round print, she had written, 40 years old. Can you believe it? With 2 exclamation points and a small lopsided heart. She had drawn the cake 14 months ago. She had not, in the end, been 39 very long. Calvin took down 2 mugs. Then he took down one and put the other back. He did this every morning. Upstairs, the floor creaked. Noah was up. Noah Reed was 9 years old and had a cowlick at the back of his head that even Margaret had not been able to defeat. He came down the stairs sideways, dragging his blue backpack by a single strap. Are you coming into school today? Noah said. He said it the way he said everything now, not pleading, just gathering data. Since August, Calvin had taken 7 sick days that were not strictly sick. Noah had been keeping count without being asked to. I am, Calvin said. He poured boiling water over the tea bag in the mug and watched the colour bloom. I am going in today. I have a class. Today is Mum's birthday. Yes. And 40. Yes. Noah set his backpack on the chair and climbed into it. He had grown 1/4 inch in September. Calvin had marked it on the doorframe in pencil because Margaret had marked the others, and the boy had asked, in a quiet voice, that no one let the line stop. I made you toast, Calvin said. You didn't make it yet. I was about to. Noah accepted this. He took the green crayon from the jar on the windowsill and went to the calendar and drew, very slowly, a small candle on top of the cake she had drawn. He drew the flame in orange. Then he sat back down. I think we should put a candle on a regular cupcake later, Noah said. From the gas station, the chocolate one. Calvin set the toast in front of him. He sat down across the table and watched his son spread the strawberry jam to the corners the way Margaret had insisted, edge to edge, no bare bread. He felt the letter in his pocket like a flat, warm stone. All right, he said, from the gas station, after school. Promise. I promise. He drove Noah to the elementary building. The leaves on Linden were turning. He got out at the curb and made the small 2-fingered salute that had been a joke between him and his mother, which Calvin had inherited without asking. After school, Noah said, cupcake. After school, cupcake. He watched his son go in through the double doors and did not put the car in gear until the doors had closed. The drive to the high school was 4 miles of 2-lane road past the reservoir. The reservoir was where Margaret had been driving when the other car crossed the line. He had stopped trying not to look at it. Today the water was the colour of a nickel, and there was a single white heron standing in the shallows, completely still, the way they did. He let himself look. He let himself drive past. The letter was still in his pocket. He told himself he would walk it down to the principal's office before homeroom and be done by 8:15. In the parking lot of Briar Hollow High, Roland Pace was emptying the trash from the picnic table outside the gym. Roland was the day custodian and had been at the school longer than any teacher in the building. He looked up when Calvin parked. Morning, Mr. Reed. Morning, Roland. Roland straightened. He pulled a folded white napkin out of his jacket pocket. I told my wife it was your wife's birthday today, he said. She made you these. They're for you. She said, don't argue. Inside the napkin were 2 squares of cornbread, still warm. Calvin stood with the napkin in his hand and could not, for a moment, speak. Roland nodded at him with the careful look of a man who had buried 2 brothers and knew the rules. I'll see you at lunch, Roland said. Don't eat them in the hall. Use a plate. My wife was specific. He went back to the picnic table. Calvin walked into the building with the cornbread in his hand. He did not, in the end, walk straight to the principal's office. He walked into the teacher's lounge instead and put the napkin on the counter and got himself a cup of the burnt coffee he allowed himself only on days he had decided ahead of time would be hard. Janet Boudry was at the counter pouring her own. Janet taught American History 51. She did not say happy anything. She set her hand for 1 second on Calvin's forearm, light, the way a woman touches a railing she is not actually relying on, and let go and walked out with her coffee, and the small print of her warm palm stayed on him through the homeroom bell. He taught second period sophomore English in room 214. 26 students. They were reading a slim, sad novel about a Russian village in winter, and he had not, when he assigned it, been thinking about himself. Today, walking up the stairs with the letter in his pocket and Roland's wife's cornbread folded in a napkin in his hand, he understood that this was a lie he had been telling himself since August. The students filed in. There was a boy in the back named Idris Mendel who had not turned in a piece of writing in 7 weeks. There was a boy named Peter who fell asleep so reliably that Calvin had given up calling on him. Calvin set his book on the lectern. He looked at the room. "Today," he said, "I want to do something different. I want each of you to take out a piece of paper and write one sentence about a small kindness you have done for somebody else in the last week. Don't sign it. Fold it in half. Put it in this hat." He held up the battered felt hat he kept on the windowsill for exactly this kind of moment. The class looked at him. 26 pieces of paper went into the hat. He had not planned this. He had walked in with 3 pages of notes on the Russian novel and an opening question about narrative distance, and the moment the students were seated, he had set the notes face down and asked for the small kindness instead, and he would think about it for years afterward and never quite know why. He drew the papers one at a time and read them out without naming anyone. "I held the door for my grandmother. I gave my brother my granola bar. I let a kid go in front of me at the water fountain. I called my dad. I told the new boy where the science room was. I helped a lady at the gas station whose card wasn't working. I gave her $3 from my own." He stopped. The room was very quiet, the way a room is quiet when something is happening that everyone can feel and no one wants to break. He looked down at the last folded paper, opened it, and read, "I told Mr. Reed good morning, even though he looked sad today, and I think Mr. Reed lost somebody and I don't know what else to do." He did not, this time, manage to read it aloud. He stood with the paper open in his hand and looked, for a long second, at the back row. Idris Mendel was looking down at his desk. The pen in his hand was still moving in small, careful loops, as if he hadn't realized he was being watched. Calvin folded the paper. He put it in his own breast pocket, right beside the resignation letter, where it was difficult to keep them separate. "Thank you," he said to the room. To Idris, he said nothing at all. He turned to the board and wrote, in his slightly slanted hand, a single line from the Russian novel, the one about how the snow keeps falling whether the soldiers can see it or not. They talked about it for 35 minutes. Idris spoke twice. He had not spoken in class since the second week of school. When the bell rang, Calvin did not move from the board. He waited until the room emptied. Idris was the last to leave. The boy paused, halfway up the aisle, and turned. "Mr. Reed," Idris said, "my mum said today was your wife's birthday. She said to say happy birthday. To her, I mean, not to you." He said it the way a 14-year-old says something he has rehearsed in the mirror. Then he went very red and walked out fast. Calvin sat down at his desk. The cornbread in the napkin was still faintly warm. He ate one piece of it slowly and looked at the board. He did not, that period, walk down to the principal's office. At lunch, he ate the second piece of cornbread at the round table in the teacher's lounge with Roland and Janet and a young woman named Erin Vasquez who taught freshman biology. They did not talk about Margaret. They talked about whether the boiler would make it through another winter and a long story Roland's wife had told him about a raccoon in the carport. Calvin laughed twice. The second time, he was surprised by the sound of it, and Janet did not look at him. She lifted her coffee and looked at the bulletin board, the way kind people do when they hear a sound they are not supposed to acknowledge. At 1:40, he had a free period. He used it, as he had planned, to walk down to the front office. Mrs. Doyle was on the phone. She held up a finger. He sat in the wooden chair under the window and put his hand on the letter in his pocket and waited. Beside him, on a corkboard, was a clipping from the Briar Hollow Gazette from last May. In the second row of the senior class photo, in a yellow dress, was Margaret Reed, who had volunteered as a parent reader for 4 Mays of her life and would not be in the photograph the next May. He had not known the clipping was on the board. He looked at her hair and made the small, deliberate effort, learned over a year, not to do certain things in a public office. Mrs. Doyle hung up. "Calvin," she said. He took the letter out of his pocket. He held it for 1 second in his lap. Then he stood and walked it across the office and laid it, face down, on her desk. "Doris," he said, "I came in here to give you this." She looked at the letter. She did not pick it up. came in, she said. I'm going to ask you to wait until tomorrow to read it. All right, she said. If by 8 in the morning I haven't come and taken it back, then read it. All right. She put the letter in her top drawer and turned the small key and put the key in the pocket of her jacket. Then she stood up from behind her desk and walked around it and put her hand on his shoulder briefly, the way Janet had touched his forearm in the lounge, the way people had been touching him all day, and she said, I am very glad you came in this morning, Calvin. And she meant the building, not the office. He went back to room 214 for 6th period juniors. They were reading a different book. He taught the class. It was, by a margin he could not measure, the best class he had taught since August. He noticed it as it was happening. The way a man notices the light is good for a photograph he is not yet taking. At 3 to 10 he walked out to the parking lot. The leaves on the maple by the gym were the colour of a struck match. Roland was at the picnic table again, talking to the assistant baseball coach about a hinge. He raised a hand. Calvin raised a hand back. Calvin drove to the elementary school. Noah was waiting on the bench by the flagpole with Mrs. Honaker, his teacher, who had stayed 12 minutes past her contracted time because she did not, in her own quiet way, leave Reed kids alone on benches today. He told me about the cupcake, Mrs. Honaker said. I told him chocolate is the only correct choice. It is, Calvin said. She bent down and tightened the strap on Noah's backpack and patted him once, very lightly, on the back of his head, just below the cowlick, and then she let him go. They drove to the gas station on Route 9. The clerk was a woman in her 60s named Vera. She knew Noah. She knew Calvin. She had been at Margaret's service in a long grey coat she had bought only for the service. Noah went straight to the chocolate cupcakes. 1, Calvin said. We agreed. 2, Vera said. 1 is on the house. Tell your dad to argue with me. Calvin did not argue with her. He paid for 1 cupcake and was given 2. Vera handed Noah a single small candle from a drawer behind the counter that Calvin had not known contained candles. Light it outside, she said. Wind's down. In the gravel lot beside the air pump, Calvin crouched in the late afternoon sun. Noah held the cupcake out very carefully on the flat of his palm. Calvin struck the match. The little wax candle caught. The flame leaned, then steadied. 40, Noah said. Mum? 40, Calvin said. Margaret. They did not sing. The wind, as Vera had promised, was down. The flame held. Calvin watched his son's face. Noah's face was a face Calvin had not seen on him since June. It was the face of a boy who had set a thing down for 1 minute because he trusted the man next to him to hold it. Noah blew out the candle. They ate the cupcakes at the picnic table behind the gas station. Vera had thrown in a bottle of milk. They split it. A truck pulled in. A truck pulled out. The light went long. Noah told a story about a kid named Wyatt who had eaten an entire eraser on a dare. He laughed, his real laugh, the open one, and Calvin did not, this time, look away. On the way home, Noah fell asleep against the window. Calvin drove past the reservoir. The heron was gone. The water had gone the same long gold as the sky. He carried the boy in. He took off Noah's sneakers and tucked him into the bed under the dinosaur blanket Margaret had hemmed by hand on the kitchen table one rainy Sunday. He stood at the bedroom door for a long minute and listened to his son breathe. In the kitchen, he stood at the table where Margaret had drawn the cake on the calendar. He set down, in his careful slanted hand, a second sheet of school stationery. He wrote 1 sentence on it. Dear Mrs. Doyle, please disregard yesterday's letter. He folded it. He put it in his shirt pocket where the resignation letter had been. He looked once at the calendar, at the green candle his son had drawn, and turned out the light. In the morning, before the bell, he would walk into the front office and take the first letter back and hand her the second. Mrs. Doyle would read the new one without expression. She would put it in the same drawer. She would lock it. She would put the key in the pocket of her jacket. She would look up at him over the rims of her glasses, and she would, in her dry way, say only this. Good. The juniors need you. He would nod. He would walk down the hall to room 214. In his pocket, folded together, would be the cornbread napkin he had not been able to throw away, and a small note from a boy in the back row that said good morning even though he looked sad today, and a single green crayon flame his son had drawn on a calendar. It would not be a different life. It would be the same life. But on a Tuesday in October, on a day that had been marked in green marker more than a year before, on the morning his wife would have turned 40, a small town had quietly and without ceremony refused to let him go, and that, he would come to understand, was the only kind of beginning he was ever going to get, and it would be enough.